1 week season.
Hey, and welcome in, OWS fam. So glad you are with us. We are back in at the DFS Lab. As always, this show presented by 1 week season, where we build a lineup on DraftKings, use it as a way to talk through the upcoming slate. In this case, tonight we are looking at Showdown with the banged up Saints limping in to Lambeau Field to take on the Packers. Packers are favored by 14 in that game, and myself and Xandamere will break it down. So excited to talk about that. I'm your host, Cheeseman, and I now welcome up Xandamere. And Xandamere, is always, joining us from the West Coast, so it's early for you. Appreciate you getting up, man. How did Week 16 turn out for you?
Yeah. Good morning. Good to talk to you as always.
Yes.
Week 16 was another sort of always the bridesmaid week, as I had a lot of someday I'll be a beautiful blushing bride.
Yes, man.
I had a lot of sweats, a lot of lineups in good spots. Didn't quite come together. Jalen Hurts was my highest owned quarterback, so when he got hurt, I was like, oh great. But I had some other lineups that made runs. I had, unfortunately, and this is the challenge of being an MME player, right? I think my best lineup, I had a really good lineup on Yahoo. It was in first place throughout all the early games, and still had a spot going in late games. Was projected to win the contest for a very long time until basically everyone just sort of stopped doing anything late. It had it's a weird lineup in that most of my Caleb stacks had at least one of Keenan Allen or DJ Moore. This one did not have either of those. It had Cole Kmet, who scored a touchdown, but then just kind of didn't do anything else. And then it had Marvin Harrison Jr. Most of those comp lineups, that combo would have been one of DJ Moore or Keenan Allen, and then Chigo Kongwo at tight end, who was my highest owned tight end. And this is just the challenge of being an MME player, is you can't construct every roster like that. And I'm not sure I would have wanted to construct every roster like that. You want some variance in there, right? I wanted some Cole Kmet. It's just unfortunate that the one roster where everything else came together was not one of the Keenan Allen, Chico Kongwo rosters.
Right, and if it had been, you probably would have just had first place with some room to spare, perhaps.
I would have won. I know I would have won. I didn't actually go calculate, exact points, but I would have won.
What was the top prize?
The Yahoo, I think it was 20K. I think.
Oh man, that would have been awesome.
And
really
then I almost banked a early only tournament until Arizona, Carolina went to overtime, and Chuba Hubbard got 50 rushing yards and a touchdown and the bonus on 2 carries. So that was cool. But that's the nature of it, right? Again, we said this before on the show. Our job as DFS players is to put ourselves in positions where we just need to get those last couple of breaks going our way, and then we win. I feel like I've done a really good job doing that this season, and that's all I can hope for.
Absolutely.
Really is, one of the ways I like to track results is what percentage of your lineups are in the top 1% of contests.
Yes,
and then
that's a good way.
If you're playing larger field stuff, it makes sense to even kind of get a little more refined than that. What percentage of your lineups are in the top 0.1% of contests? And so this season, I've placed something like 3.4% of my rosters in the top 1% of contests, which is actually the highest I've ever gone in a year. That tells me I'm playing really, really well this year. Unfortunately, I'm actually down this year in terms of actual real American dollars. I'm making all the fake dollars, but I'm down in real American dollars because I haven't really had much success in getting from the top 1% to the actual top. I keep having these really close calls, and it's just the nature of the beast, right? It evens out over time. At some point, those breaks will go my way, and so all I can do is kind of keep trying to do what I'm doing, and eventually I'll get it.
I still have not run those numbers. I need to do that. You just probably pull your results. You just pull the whole spreadsheet from DraftKings. But if you're running 3% in the top 1, that's 3 times higher than what is considered where you need to be. So that is a strong.
Yeah.
You're running very strong in terms of the data where you need to be. But like you said, it just hasn't broken your way quite yet.
Yeah, the highest I've ever been in a season is right around 2. And there are sites the Solver has a free bankroll tracker you can use even if you're not a subscriber.
Right.
I'm pretty sure. I don't know if you can do the full analysis, but I think you can use the tracker without being a paid subscriber. And you can just upload your spreadsheet to that, and it'll do that calculation for you. It'll show you your distribution of your tournament lineups.
Right. Yeah. I remember Roto Grinders used to have something like that I had used.
Which is very cool. So it's a very useful feature to get an idea of how you're doing if you have a large sample size of lineups to analyze. If you're a single entry player, it's not useful because it's a wildly small sample size. But if you enter a fair number of lineups, it can be a really useful tool.
Yeah, man. I had a sweat yesterday in the afternoon, only just a single bullet, but like I was in first for a short time and top 5 for like almost to the very end. In afternoon only. And like you said, you just have to have things break your way. It was nice to be like in position. The Bills, when their defense scored a touchdown, that put me up into first for a short time. But the 50-yard touchdown run by Devon Achane, just late in that Niners-Dolphins game, just absolutely.
The very end. The very end of the game.
Yeah, man. It was like just like a knife to the heart. So it took me out. But I still was, it was still, I broke even yesterday, and I would have had like 20x my entry fees if that had, well, not 20x if I had won 10K, I would have like 20x. All that to say, it was nice to be in position. So I'll take it. With that, dude, Showdown. You want to take a jump into Showdown and look at what we got for tonight?
Yeah, let's do it. I will note, by the way, we had a fun Showdown last night.
Yes, let's hear about it.
Instead of talking about strategy for main slate, let's talk about strategy for Showdown. And so last night's Showdown was the Bucs versus the Cowboys. The Bucs are missing Cade Otton, who's a pretty key piece of their offense this year, right? He gets a lot of volume at tight end. And so the question was, well, how does that play out, right? Like with Cade Otton gone, he hasn't missed a game this year, and he's playing a ton of snaps. Bucs are still missing Chris Godwin, right? Like, so how does that play out? And Payne Durham was sort of the next man up by snap count. Payne Durham is a blocking tight end who has really never been a receiver in his career. He's a blocker. That's what he's out there.
Not a pass catcher. Yeah.
His career is short, right? Like he had 7 targets all of last season. I think he had fewer than that this season until yesterday. Let me say 1 second. Let me go check Payne Durham. So yeah, until Payne Durham had 2 targets on the season this year, right? And so he's never really been pass catching tight end. So the question to me was, well, how's that going to play out, right? Like who's going to be the guy? And what I thought was there's a good chance it could be Ryan Miller, he's listed as a wide receiver on the sites. And Ryan Miller he played tight end in college. He was a converted tight end.
Which good on you for knowing that, for having that back knowledge.
Yeah, he converted to wide receiver this year because the Bucs had a real need at wide receiver when both Evans and Godwin went down. So he plays wide receiver from this year. So he was listed as wide receiver. And so I wrote up Ryan Miller, so I thought was an interesting tight end choice. And that led to some questions because other sites are projecting Payne Durham as the lead tight end. Payne Durham was the lead. Payne Durham actually got 7 targets last night, which was to me wild because he's never been a pass catcher. But he's also, he's not a pass catcher, and so even on 7 targets, he caught 5 of them. Good for him. For 29 yards, 5 yards or 6 yards per reception.
Yeah.
So he's kind of this plodding, like catch and fall down to the line of scrimmage guy. So that's okay. At min salary, that's okay, right? That's 8.9 DraftKings points at min salary. Like that's not bad. But Ryan Miller is a more athletic. Ryan Miller caught a touchdown toward the end of the game. And the point isn't to like victory lap it and say, aha, I was right. Yay. Like Payne Durham had the role. The point was that Payne Durham came in, he was something like, we tried to look this up on Roto Grinders Results DB and actually find the contest link. But from what I can tell, like Payne Durham was pretty highly owned last night because major sites are projecting him as being the lead tight end, and he was $200 his mid salary. So because of that, he ended up being really highly owned. I think he was at least 20% owned. If I'm reading Roto Grinders Results DB right, without being able to actually find the contest link, I think that's right. Whereas Ryan Miller was he was like 1 point something percent, so 2% owned. And so the point isn't to say I was right about Ryan Miller. I mean, obviously he got lucky to catch a touchdown. The point is to say in Showdown, we want, especially with such small player pools, if you're playing the big GPPs, it makes sense to lean into the more volatile spots. Like we couldn't really know how that situation was going to play out, right? It could have been Ryan Miller playing more, could have been Payne Durham playing more. What we could know with a pretty high degree of confidence is that Payne Durham, because of how every other site was projecting him, was going to be a much, much more popular play than Ryan Miller. And so, for example, let me go look at, give me 1 second. I'm just going to go look at the point projections. And so one of the things I like to do is aggregate point projections from multiple sites to avoid the problem of who's right, who's wrong. So when I aggregate point projections from multiple sites, I had Payne Durham between like 5 and 7 DK points at $200. And so if you ran optimal lineups, if you ran unmodified optimal lineups without changing any setting,
yeah,
you were to get Payne Durham in near 100% of your lineups. And that's a sign that he's going to be highly owned because he projects really well for his salary. Ryan Miller, I don't think any site had him projected for over 1 fantasy point. So it's clear also, excuse me, it's clear also that he was going to be much lower owned. And so again, this isn't about who was the better play, who was likely to score more points. This is about saying this was a very uncertain situation where I think it was very hard to predict with confidence who was going to score more fantasy points. But what we could predict with confidence was who was going to be more highly owned by a large margin. Payne Durham was over 10x the ownership, right? He was on over 10 times the rosters.
Yeah.
Miller. And so, as a Showdown tournament player, Ryan Miller made a whole lot of sense as a tournament pivot, as a tournament play, because he just wasn't getting anywhere near the ownership of Durham. And so you're playing into this uncertain situation where it could be guy A, could be guy B, but guy B is less than 10% of the ownership. And so I'm going to go guy B and just hope that that's how it plays out because I'm getting the massive ownership discount. And so it's the question of like, what do you win when you win, right? Like if I'm right, how many times is this lineup duplicated? Now, it turned out that in terms of winning the big GPP, it didn't matter. The optimal lineup did not have either of those guys because several other cheap guys had big games like Brandon Aubrey, who just kicks field goals from like, the opposing end zone every week. And if you're the Cowboys, why don't you just kick
oh my word?
Seriously. Every set of downs? Why would you ever punt? I guess let's let Aubrey do it. Just why ever punt? Let Aubrey bang him from.
It completely resets the field because you only have to make it to just past midfield to really have a very viable look at a field goal. It's just dude, Aubrey's insane.
Anyway, so he didn't end up in the optimal lineup, but he did end up in some winning lineups, right? In some smaller tournaments, for example, like he would have won you money. I saw one of our subscribers got a plus 5,000 or 50-1 bet on Ryan Miller to score an anytime touchdown and hit that one. So congratulations to him.
No way, that's crazy, dude.
Yeah.
Well,
cool.
I like how you said it just like it was an uncertain situation because it was, but the field was showing a high amount of certainty because other sites were saying Payne Durham is going to be the guy. And so they're showing through their ownership, we know what's going to happen. And really, when it was very uncertain. And so in that case, you're right, just taking the guy that is, practically I don't know if it's a 50-50 bet, but it could be, in terms of the uncertainty and taking him at 1/10, the ownership just is very much a plus EV move.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You want to try, you want to play into uncertain situations, right? That's a general principle of DFS, and it's definitely a principle of, especially Showdown, where you're trying to not just have, you have to think a lot more about differentiation in Showdown than you do on main slates. And so, if you're playing into these uncertain situations, that's how you want to do it. To me, is lean more into the variance of lean more into the uncertainty. Because again, the question in DFS isn't never going to just be what do you win or how likely am I going to win. It's what do I win when I win, and that's that's what you get with the lower owned plays like Ryan Durham is you get the what do I win when I win equation more in your favor.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, man, I love that. And I'm just I don't know if that plays in tonight, man, but gosh, the Saints, just like who are they going to put on the field is what it is, the kind of game that it feels like for me. Are you ready to switch to this game or anything else to add in terms of the strategy elements from last night?
Yeah, let's talk about the poor Saints.
I was looking at this last night and it is like, I like to try and think, okay, in what ways, like, a few weeks ago, we talked about the Cowboys and Texans, and that was a game where you were like, what if Dallas plays well and makes this a game? And let's build some lineups playing into that angle. It feels just so hard especially on the road. It feels so hard to say, okay, everyone's going to be playing probably a Packers smash angle. I have a hard time getting away from that myself. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on this matchup and, how you really play the Saints.
Yeah, so I think, look, the obvious thing to think is that the Packers are going to smash. Packers are the much better team. They are. I didn't see the line moved over. I wrote the article last night. As of last night, they're 14-point home favorites.
Yeah, that's the line.
Just massive. Their implied team total is 2x that of New Orleans. Also, just absolutely massive. Packers projected for roughly speaking, I think it was 28 points, and the Saints projected for 14 points. So like when you have that kind of situation, it's like, what do you do, right? Like, look,
that was the Bills yesterday. That was the Bills-Patriots spread yesterday.
It was. So I think there's a variety of ways you can play this. I do think it is totally reasonable to play Packers onslaughts, right? Yep. Like a lot of people are going to be playing Packers onslaughts. Packers onslaughts are going to project really well. Packers onslaughts are the way the game, when we talk about like what's the way the game is likeliest to play out, I kind of write that in my article a lot. Like, how is this game most likely to play out?
Yeah.
It is most likely to play out with the Packers curb stomping the Saints, right?
Yeah.
That's just how it is.
Mm-hmm.
Now the question is that what you want to bet on? That is your, the decision you have to make based on your risk tolerance, your DFS, like your overall DFS strategy, like how you play DFS. There's not a right answer to that question, right? That is the strategy question you need to decide for yourself. So,
right.
And then you have to also think that, like, because it's a 14-point spread, like I talk about how 5-1 onslaughts are underplayed by the field often. So you've got to think about, okay, well, if I'm going to play a 5-1 onslaught, how do I do that? Totally reasonable to play.
Yes.
But if you're going to do it, you've just got to think about how you differentiate, because in a 14-point spread, 5-1 onslaughts are going to be much more popular than in a 3-point spread, right?
Yes.
So you've got to think about not just how you or not just do I play it. You think about how I play it. So I'm going to build a 5-1 onslaught because I think it's useful in this context of the show to talk about how to do that in a way that's different from what I think the field is likely to do.
Yes, I can't wait to hear this, because that's kind of a question that I had as well. It's like, if you're going to build a 5-1 onslaught, how do you do it in a way that can be unique, that can potentially still give you a shot at like a first place, or if not like a solo first, like not duped with 1,000 people?
Yeah, a not widely duplicated first, right? That's our goal. Our goal is not, we're never, I shouldn't say never is a bad word in DFS, but we're unlikely to be first, we're unlikely to find first place in solo finishes that frequently. What we can try to do with a fairly high degree of confidence is figure out where we're unlikely to be heavily duplicated.
Yes.
Right. So let's start with what I think is a lineup that is going to be heavily duplicated, or at least reasonably so. So if you do me a favor, I'm just going to run through this really quick. Plug in Josh Jacobs at captain.
Okay.
The most logical captain choice in the world.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Jordan Love, Packers D. Now we have a little bit of salary we can play with. And so now you've got Jordan Love. You're going to play at least one Packers pass catcher, possibly two. So let's plug in, I don't know, Jordan Reed, Tucker Kraft, and Dante Pettis. So I'll give you a sec to find those players. Pettis is 1K. So,
using all the salary, and that's always the first sign, right?
So this is a bad onslaught lineup, right? And let me, we can. This is not rocket science to figure out why. We have the most popular captain, Josh Jacobs. He's going to be the most popular captain by a wide margin. We have the quarterback. We have the defense. Those are good plays in an onslaught lineup, right? Defense is highly likely to appear in the optimal onslaught lineup. Those are good plays. Then we have Jordan Reed and Tucker Kraft, two Green Bay pass catchers to go along with Jordan Love. And then Dante Pettis is sort of like, okay, we spent all our salary. Dante Pettis is the guy who fits, who's going to be on the field. I do kind of think, especially if Marquez Valdes-Scantling is in, I think Dante Pettis is going to go a little bit relatively low owned compared to where I think he should be, but he's not going to be like 1%, right? But even if he was going to be 1 or 2% owned in a big tournament, because of how all the other players in this roster are going to be so popular. Like, you can build rosters in Showdown with very low owned spots, with one very low owned spot, and still have a lot of duplication if it's the most obvious roster that fits that salary, right? Like, I've seen rosters with a 1% owned captain where it's like 30 or 40 duplications, because if you play that one guy at captain, it's the most logical roster that fits around it. So like, if you build the rest of this roster, like if you build the other 5 Packers, you don't have a lot of salary left, and so Jonte Pettis is the most logical guy who fits that last spot. So even if he was super low owned, he was still going to be this roster is still going to be pretty heavily duplicated, I expect.
Well, that is something I never thought about, but like that is very nuanced. Like, you can like, just because the other 5 would dictate certain plays, even if it's like not the play, it's 1%. The other 5 can have a very heavy influence on duplication. That's
exactly
yeah.
Exactly right. So now our job is to figure out how we go from duplication to uniqueness, or to low duplication, without, while still keeping the roster strong. So, you could play around with the captain choice. I personally think that the Green Bay Packers spread out the ball a lot in their passing game. It's rare. I think in fact, if memory serves, I think I want to say 2, because I wrote the Packers up a couple weeks ago for a showdown. And I found this data point. I think it's been 2 games in which any Packers pass catcher has reached 10 targets. So you're relying on wild efficiency for Packers pass catchers. And because of that, it makes it hard for me to get behind a Packers pass catcher at captain. Like, I'd have some, but really, like, Jacobs is such a strong captain. Like, if I were building 150 Packers onslaughts, I would have other captains. But for this particular one, like, I'm going to keep it Jacobs, because he is far and away the strongest captain choice. So I'm not going to tweak that.
Okay. Should you want me to just clear this out with Jacobs at the captain?
Yeah, I'll start there. And so then, like, when we start thinking about, okay, where else do we differentiate? Well, there's a couple spots we could consider. One, we consider not using Jordan Love. And what we'd be doing there is essentially saying the Packers, like, all the touchdowns come on the ground. Keep in mind, Jordan Love does not need a huge score to appear in optimal lineups, because we're already betting that only one Saint shows up, which means that even if Jordan Love only gets 10 points, there's a decent chance of optimal lineups. So the way I would think of this is, like, he's not a big rushing quarterback, right? He's only rushed for 75 yards on the year. He's a pocket passer. Don't know what happened there, by the way. He used to rush a little more. Anyway, he's kind of given that up. So he's a pocket passer, which means he's going to need kind of at least a touchdown. So, like, we got to think, like, okay, if he scores a touchdown, then who gets the touchdown? Because in a low-scoring game, in a low-scoring Packers side game, if Jordan Love shows up in the optimal lineup with 1 touchdown, what that's telling you is Jordan Love only scored like 10 or 12 points, and he showed up in the optimal lineup. So that also tells you whoever he threw the touchdown to is highly likely to be in the optimal lineup. So I wouldn't play Jordan Love naked. I wouldn't play him without a pass catcher. But you could consider taking Jordan Love out. That would be a reasonable way to go.
Yeah.
And a way that's under-owned, right? Because people play quarterbacks in onslaughts, because you have lots of salary to do so, right? So why would you not? That's one way to go. That's not how I'm going to go. So let's plug Jordan Love in. I'm just kind of trying to walk through, like, permutations of how I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like it.
Packers D, I'm going to include, because now I don't love playing, like, chalk defenses in showdowns, because, like, defense is just such a volatile spot that, like, defense at high ownership is not really my game. But in onslaught builds, the DST is so likely to show up in winning onslaught builds. And from what I've seen, the field doesn't tend to boost DST ownership specifically in onslaught builds overall, like in aggregate. So, like, if the Packers D is 30% owned tonight, it might be 35% in all Packers 5-1 builds. And so, like, playing it into 30% ownership overall is really scary, right? Because defenses are such volatile positions. But playing it in 35% ownership, specifically in onslaught builds, is much less scary, because if an onslaught build wins, the DST is over 50%, has over 50% odds to be in the winning lineup, because you're implying the other team just doesn't do anything on offense, which means the defense scores well, right? So that's sort of a way to, like, leverage the ownership a little bit. So, like, I would play, like, I'm fine playing Packers defense in onslaught builds. I would probably avoid them in non-onslaught builds because of how owned they're going to be. So let's plug in Packers D.
Essentially, love that, dude. I love how Hilo calls you the human computer, not for nothing, because you're taking this granular approach. Because again, this is a situation, a game where you have to really kind of get more granular because you're trying to be different in a build that's overall going to be popular. So I like the attention you're giving to this.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'm trying to figure out like where the edges in the ownership are, right? And I feel like that's, Packers D is over-owned in all builds, but under-owned specifically in onslaughts.
In the brackets of an onslaught build. Okay, so Packers D, yes.
Again, you can go different directions with all three of these plays, and those are all viable choices. Like I'm just trying to project, like I'm trying to show a permutation of how to make this kind of build work. Now's where we're going to get different. So what we're going to do, instead of playing any of the three big Packers pass catchers like Reed, Watson, or Daubs, we're just going to play Tucker Kraft, who's 5,800.
I like it.
Tucker Kraft's volume projection is really about the same as the big guys. He also has the highest touchdown equity. And so again, remember we talked about when we said like we're projecting that Jordan Love doesn't have a massive game. Josh Jacobs gets most of the scoring. So we're projecting now that Jordan Love has an okay game. Maybe he throws for 8 touchdowns. But he ends up in the optimal lineup. And so basically what we're saying here is, Tucker Kraft is if you were to place odds, who has the best odds of any Packers pass catcher to catch a single touchdown if one passing touchdown is thrown, it would be Tucker Kraft. And so we're going to play the Love Kraft stack. Love Kraft, get it? Haha.
So quick question. So you're an MME player, so if you're kind of using this, say, as like a base, a base for one of your portfolios of lineups, are you trying to rotate through like multiple single receivers to pair with Love? So you try and catch like the one Packer who scores a touchdown.
So what I would do if I were building this construction, like let's say I'm doing 150 lineups, I might say I want 40 lineups that have this basic construction. And so I would lock Josh Jacobs at captain, I would lock Love, and I'd lock Packers D in flex. And then I'd have a rule that says between 1 and 2 and I'd list the Packers that I want to go around it. And it would be, I'd include like Reed, Watson, and Daubs. I'd have a max 1 rule of those. Well, I think you actually cannot have 2 of those guys with the salary. So I don't think I need the max 1 rule. There's no salary to have 2 of those 3 guys, but I have a rule of like between 1 and 2 of the 3 big Packers pass catchers of Wicks, of Kraft. And then I'd also include Chris Brooks. I'd include Emmanuel Wilson. I'd include Bo Melton. I'd include Malik Heath in those. Because what you're also thinking is like late in the game, what happens, right? Because like you're in an onslaught build, you're betting on like the Packers just absolutely crushing. And so you're thinking like, okay, at some point the Packers may pull their starters and you may get a fourth quarter of backups playing. And so that's also where you're trying to get into sort of like leaning into the variance there of saying like these guys who don't normally play that much could play more and get more run.
And then also you said something about max 1 or 2. I know you said in the salary you weren't going to have to worry about that, but in general, what were you like about to say you would do a max of what?
Oh, I was going to say max 1 of Reed, Watson, and Daubs because they're all expensive and you're thinking it's like hard for them all to get there together.
Okay, that makes sense. Nice.
I tend to actually be pretty aggressive at limiting my Packers expensive pass catcher exposure in showdowns because this offense does spread the ball around a lot. Like I generally use a max 2 rule of the main guys because I include the 3 main wide receivers and then Tucker Kraft in that group. I don't want 4. I don't want 3 of those 4 because they do spread the ball around so much that it's really hard for 3 of them to put up strong scores. So now we have not a lot of salary left. And this is where, remember the combo that we used here in the original lineup was Jalen Reed and Dante Pettis. And so what we're going to do instead is we're going to go with, and there's a multiple permutations we can go here. We're going to go Chris Brooks, who's 2K, by the way. He's 2K.
Chris Brooks. Okay. Packers running back.
Yeah. So Chris Brooks is the guy who he kind of looks like he's taken the RB2 role, maybe. Now, Chris Brooks and Emmanuel Wilson are somewhat interchangeable here, right? Like Chris Brooks looks like he's taken the RB2 role. It could swing back the other way. I have a slight lean to Brooks over Emmanuel Wilson. But like it could go either way here. The point here is we are betting on the Packers to crush the Saints. And so what we're thinking is at some point, like RB2s are highly likely to show up in onslaught builds because onslaught builds inherently have garbage time, right? Because there's you're betting on the other team just not being competitive and not keeping up. And so at some point the Packers are saying, okay, we don't need to load down Josh Jacobs with 25 plus touches again. We're coming up on the end of the season. We've clearly won this game. And I think that like this is anecdotal. I have not actually studied this, but I think it makes sense to me that you would be more likely to see garbage time running back trade off late in the season than early in the season, especially when teams are starting to think, they're starting to look ahead to what's next, right?
Yes.
Looking ahead to the playoffs and saying, well, do we really want to do we want to expose our primary running back to more workload in a game that we're up by 3 scores? So that's my hope. My hope is that Chris Brooks gets a little more run at the end of the game and finds his way into a solid score. And it's also easier for an RB2 to find a solid score in an onslaught, not just because they get more work, but because there's less overall scoring. Because essentially you're already taking one team out of the equation and saying, nobody on this team has a big game or only one guy has even a solid game. And so like it becomes easier for something like an 8 points from a Chris Brooks to potentially be optimal if the Saints all suck, right?
Yeah.
The Saints all fail. So that's my stand. Now you can plug in a Saint. Now I think the obvious Saint to plug in, assuming he plays, which is not quite known, the obvious Saint to plug in here would be Marcus Valdes-Scantling, who is 6.6K. He's kind of the wide receiver 1 right now. We're not going to do that because, again, I want to try and think more about differentiation here as opposed to just, what's optimal. And so there's a couple places to go. My favorite place would probably be Juwan Johnson, who I think who fits easily because Juwan Johnson is like one of the last men standing of the guys who is actually on the Saints offense to begin the year. I mean, they've got Chris Olave's hurt. Chris Olave was designated to return from IR, but is not actually making his return this week. Alvin Kamara is out. Taysom Hill's out. Rashid Shaheed is out. So, like, of the guys left standing from the original starting lineup of the Saints on week 1, Juwan Johnson's really one of the few that's still around. And so, I think that's from a talent perspective.
Exactly.
From a, knowing the offense perspective, like they're just a carousel of rotating guys at wide receiver. I still think Dante Pettis, if Marcus Valdes-Scantling doesn't play, Dante Pettis is super interesting to me. Dante Pettis has had an ascending role the last several weeks and got 5 targets last week. I think
would you play him? Would you play him here, even though you'd have 7,000 left over?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. I think Juwan Johnson is. I was kind of debating who I wanted to put in for the final spot on the show. But were I building this for real, I would have a Juwan Johnson version. I'd have a Dante Pettis version. I'd have Emmanuel Wilson versions instead of Chris Brooks. So like this, I try to spread it around to think about how I try to cover bases once I have my core. I think Dante Pettis is totally viable in this lineup, but I'm going to go Juwan. I think Juwan, I have a slight preference for Juwan Johnson to Dante Pettis, so I'm going to go with him in this lineup for the sort of official one. But so the way, and also like you can just see how it doesn't take that much to change this lineup materially from what was likely to be our very chalky lineup, which used all of its salary and played Jaden Reed, who's going to be highly owned, and then played the one Saint who sort of fit the salary structure after playing Jaden Reed. Just making a 2v2 swap to Chris Brooks and Juwan Johnson should, is this lineup going to be, well, it might not be unique now that we've made it on a show, but like, would this lineup be unique if we hadn't made it on a show? Maybe. I think it'd very likely be very low owned. And it's same if you swap out Juwan Johnson for Dante Pettis, because now you're taking the one highly owned guy, Reed, and then the one guy who may not be highly owned in a vacuum, but would be highly owned in that construction because he's the only one that makes the salary fit. And you're switching it to 2 guys, you're leaving 3,600 on the table. So I think this gets you significantly away from the duplication, which, for me in the big tournaments is what the game's about, is what Showdown's about, is you're trying to set yourself up so that when you win, you can win a lot, right? Look, I love winning showdowns, and if you tell me my choice is between losing money and winning showdown in a giant tie and winning 8K, I'll take the 8K, right? Obviously. But if you tell me my choice is between losing money or having a realistic shot at winning 300K, which is the first place prize in this tournament tonight, I want to take the shot where, like, if I'm right, it's like life-changing money, not just like, cool, 8K, like that's like, don't get me wrong, 8K is awesome. And I recognize for some people, 8K probably is life-changing money. So yes, I get it. Like, that's sort of a privileged statement of me to be like, oh, ho, 8K.
Certainly.
But
yeah.
But that's like, that's a couple of mortgage payments. That'd be awesome. But it's not like,
and for some players, it's like, that's 1 week of buy-ins or something like that.
So buy-ins.
Yeah, exactly. So no, I get the differentiation, and hopefully everyone here does. But yeah, absolutely, dude. I mean, everyone here is like, yes, I would much prefer like a solo takedown or sharing it with 3 people versus sharing it with 100. Absolutely.
And that's really the art and science of Showdown, right? It's trying to figure out where you balance. It's a spectrum. It's not like an either or. It's not binary. It's a spectrum of. On the one side of the spectrum is likeliest to get first place. On the other side of the spectrum is likeliest to be unique. And you have to figure out where on that spectrum that you want to fall with your lineup builds. And either way is fine, right? Either way is totally viable. You just have to think about your risk tolerance, your bankroll, how you are as a player, where your edge is as a player. I mean, you could say, like, I'd love to be the contrarian guy going for the solo finish, but I suck at that. I'm not good at that kind of build. I am very good at consistently, I can grind out smaller profits by consistently winning in larger splits. That's possible too, right? You can be that kind of player. That's okay. But you should know where you are as a player and fall somewhere on that spectrum through intentionality, not through, you don't just want to like find your way to that spectrum and land on a spot by accident, right? You want to be somewhere because you feel it fits your style, fits your bankroll, fits what you're good at, fits your strengths. You want to be somewhere intentionally.
Absolutely. That's great stuff, Xandamere. And so the lineup that we landed on, for those of you listening on the podcast, was Josh Jacobs at the captain with Jordan Love, Packers D, Tucker Kraft, Chris Brooks, and rounding it out with Juwan Johnson as the lone Saint. Xandamere, again, sharp stuff, and just appreciate all the attention to just kind of, how to get different on a slate where it's going to be a little harder to get different maybe than a normal slate. So this has been great stuff. Any idea if you'll end up having time to play tonight? I don't know what the NBA slate looks like tonight, but I know
it is like a 14-game NBA
Holy
slate.
Mother.
So yeah, I don't know that I'll get
We'll
time
have to
play tonight because I got the giant NBA slate, and it's it's the 23rd of December, so the kiddos on Christmas break, going up on the holiday. I'm going to pick up the prime rib at the butcher today, all that fun stuff.
Dude, the prime rib, man. I like sticking in your lane. Prime rib. I'm doing prime rib as well for Christmas. So I'm following your advice.
Yes.
There we go.
Prime rib is the way to go. I'm so excited. Oh, it's so good. It's
so good, dude. Oh, I'm
making 4 ribs. I'm making 4 ribs this time. So I got some leftovers. And then what I need to figure out, I did prime rib for Thanksgiving, but I didn't, we only made 2 ribs because we were leaving town after Thanksgiving for a trip. Guess we got some leftovers this time. And then what I'm trying to figure out, I've tried to do this once and it kind of failed. What we're going to try to do is figure out how to make a prime rib stew with the bones and a little bit of like kind of the meat on the bones at the end.
Yeah.
I need to figure out so I'm in the market, by the way, if anyone here has a good recipe for like a prime rib stew with the bones and like kind of a little bit of some of the meat on the bones, I'm in the market. So hit me up.
Yeah, man, drop it in the comments below. And I like it, dude. I like it. Yeah, maybe next year we'll have to have a dedicated like culinary some kind of hybrid culinary DFS show when we do this for Thanksgiving. So Xandamere, great stuff, man. Enjoy enjoy the day. Hope you have a good night with NBA or NFL, whatever you choose to play, and we will talk to you. Man, just crazy that we only have 1 more week of regular season. We'll talk to you next week.
We have 2 more weeks.
This week, next week is week 18.
No,
so there won't be a showdown on Monday night for week 18.
Well, they're not. There's no Monday Night Football. Oh.
No, it's all Sunday. That's what the NFL always does.
You're right. The end on Sunday. Oh shoot. Okay. Well, so be it.
Well, maybe we'll figure something out. Anyway, great stuff, Xandamere, and we'll talk to you next time.
Good to see you. Have a good holiday, man.
Okay, you too.
Bye.